After he was arrested, Charles Crawford told investigators a story. He said that after he took Kristie Ray to an old abandoned barn in the woods, things calmed down. He removed her handcuffs. She stopped crying, and the two of them spent the night leaning against each other to keep warm, sharing cookies and just talking. He described it like something out of a dream. Almost peaceful, he said. But when officers found Kristie's body the next day, her hands were cuffed behind her back around a tree trunk. A sock was shoved in her mouth. Her jeans were pulled below her hips, and she had been stabbed once through the heart. Charles never told that part of the story, and on October 15, 2025, after spending 31 years on death row, he was executed by lethal injection in Mississippi. Here's what happened. Friday, January 29, 1993, began like any other day for 20-year-old Kristie Ray. She spent the afternoon working at Sunburst Bank, side by side with her mother, Mary. Kristie was balancing a lot: college classes at Northeast Mississippi Community College, part-time work, and a social life in their small, quiet town of Challebeat. When the clock neared 5, the two locked up for the day, chatted for a moment in the parking lot, and went their separate ways. Mary had some errands to run, and they planned to meet later that night at home for dinner. But Mary didn't know this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. By 6:45 p.m., Mary tried calling Kristie, but there was no answer. At first, she brushed it off, thinking maybe Kristie was with her boyfriend. But when she got home around 7, the silence in the house felt wrong. Kristie's car was missing. The lights were off. And on the kitchen table, a single note sat waiting. The handwriting was messy, scrawled across a piece of paper with a crude map and shaky lines. It read, "There will be a red flag somewhere on this block. Tuesday, 12, midnight. $15,000 in gym bag, or she dies. No police." Mary's hands trembled as she read the words. This wasn't some prank. It was a threat, and her daughter was missing. She searched the house in a panic. Kristie's purse was still there, but her bedroom looked torn apart. The phone line had been cut. And that's when the fear really took over. Mary raced through the night trying to find her. First, she drove to the home of Kristie's boyfriend, then to the video store where Kristie worked weekends. But no one had seen her. At the store, Mary called her husband, Tommy, and then she dialed 911. Within hours, Tippah County deputies arrived, and by midnight, the FBI was involved. Back at the house, the signs were everywhere. Someone had broken in. The screen on Kristie's window had been sliced open, and a wooden pallet leaned beneath it, like it had been used to climb inside. In the master bedroom, drawers had been pulled out and rummaged through. Whoever came into that house had a plan, and they had already carried it out. Later that same day, on the other side of town, someone's family made a discovery that changed everything. In the attic of their home, tucked away like a secret, was a handwritten ransom note, chilling not just in what it said, but in how familiar it looked. They hadn't seen the letter left behind in Mary's house yet, but the handwriting was almost identical. The two women who found it didn't hesitate. It was his wife and his mother. And the person who wrote the note? Charles Crawford. Charles, better known as Chuck, was 26 years old and was already in trouble. He was supposed to go on trial that Monday for a different rape and assault case. But this was something else, something even worse. They brought the note straight to his attorney, and he wasted no time, and he got law enforcement involved that same night. By Saturday morning, the tiny town had turned into the center of a massive search. FBI agents, state troopers, and deputies from every corner of Tippah County crowded the parking lot of the local school, which now served as the command post. The disappearance of Kristie wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It had become a manhunt. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Chuck. He had been out on bond, waiting for trial on another case that was supposed to be held in 4 days. But now, with this second ransom note tied directly to his family, investigators believed Kristie's disappearance wasn't a coincidence, and they believed Chuck knew exactly what happened to her. Officers moved fast. They surrounded the home of Chuck's father-in-law, believing he might show up there. And he did. Just hours later, Chuck showed up carrying a double-barrel shotgun and a switchblade, and he was arrested on the spot. Inside the patrol car, he looked dazed but stayed quiet. When asked about Kristie, he claimed he didn't know her personally, only by sight. But that lie didn't last long, as the FBI had questions of their own, and they weren't going to let him walk away. Chuck started off saying he had been out hunting in the woods, but when he was asked whether Kristie was still alive, his facade cracked. His eyes filled with tears. "She's not alive," he whispered. And just 20 minutes later, Chuck agreed to take them to her. As night set in, he led the search team through thick brush and into the woods. Around 9:45 p.m., they reached a remote patch of forest just a few hundred yards from an old structure locals called Hopper Barn. Chuck came to a stop, pointed at the ground, and said quietly, "She's here." And when officers raked back some of the leaves, they saw her. Kristie's hands were cuffed behind her back, wrapped around the trunk of a young cedar tree. A sock had been stuffed into her mouth and tied in place with a gag, and her jeans had been pulled down below her hips. Dr. Stephen Hain, the state pathologist, later said the evidence told a brutal story. Kristie had still been alive when she fought. Her body was covered in scrapes and abrasions, the kind you get when you're dragged across rough ground, trying to escape. The injuries were also consistent with those of someone attempting to avoid or resist a. There were bruises on her lips, as though her face had been slammed against something hard. The marks on her wrists matched the metal cuffs that held her. And the final wound, a single deep stab to the chest, had pierced her heart and left lung. It took her 1 to 2 minutes to die, but she had felt every second of it. When the officers found her, Chuck just looked at them and said, "Why didn't you finish me off?" 2 days after his arrest on February 1st, Chuck was ready to talk again. He said he didn't really know Kristie, only that he had seen her around Walnut. He claimed he had been worried about an upcoming event, referring to his trial, and that he wanted to be alone. That's why he went to the old Hopper Barn, carrying a shotgun, a revolver, and a knife, the Marine kind, as he described it. For weeks he had been stashing supplies there, cookies, soda, blankets, whatever he could find. That morning, he went back there, drinking, eating cookies, and thinking about running away, or ending his life. But he wasn't able to do either, he said. By midday, he wandered into the woods, built a small fire to stay warm, and claimed he blacked out. The next thing he remembered, he said, was being inside the Ray family home. When he came to, Kristie was already lying on the floor, sobbing, with her hands cuffed behind her back. He told investigators that he had pulled a ski mask over his face so she couldn't recognize him, and demanded the keys to her car. But instead of leaving, he took her with him. He claimed he never meant to hurt her, just that he panicked and didn't know what else to do. And that ransom note Mary later found? He swore he didn't write it. According to him, Kristie had been scared at first, but eventually calmed down as they drove. They talked, he said. For nearly an hour, they just kept driving, and by the time he parked near the old Hopper Barn, things had settled down. He said he took off the ski mask, removed her handcuffs after she promised not to run, and told her they would stay the night in the barn. Chuck described it like something out of a dream, almost peaceful. He talked about sharing cookies, talking, and even leaning against each other to keep warm, but that version of events started falling apart the moment it left his mouth. By dawn, sirens cut through the stillness. Chuck heard them and panicked. He thought they were there for him. So he ran into the woods with the shotgun in one hand and the knife in the other, while Kristie followed him, begging him to surrender. She told him no one was hurt, and she would help him explain everything if he just turned himself in. And for a second, Chuck almost believed her. He later said he felt low, and by his own words, Kristie had almost convinced him to let her go. Almost. He said they started walking toward her car, and he even gave her the shotgun, said it was proof he didn't want to hurt her. But then, just like before, came another blackout. At least that's what he claimed. The next thing Chuck said he remembered was sitting on a tree stump, deep in the woods, barefoot and dazed. Kristie was at his feet, handcuffed and dead. He said she was still fully clothed, with one of his socks shoved into her mouth. He then panicked and dragged her by the feet across the ground, accidentally pulling her pants down in the process. Then he covered her with leaves and sat there for a while, staring at her body, trying to figure out what to do next. Eventually, he stood up, put his boots back on, picked up his shotgun and knife, and started walking toward his father-in-law's house. And that's where the police would arrest him later that day. Chuck admitted he had lied at first to buy time. He said he knew taking Kristie was wrong. "I must have killed her," he told investigators, "but I don't remember doing it." He insisted he had blacked out, that he couldn't control himself. But when investigators searched the Hopper barn, they found the kind of supplies that only a man planning something would store: clothing, bedding, food, drinks, ammunition, even handcuff keys and a padlock. Days later, volunteers combing through the woods near where Kristie's body had been discovered found more. Under a pile of brush lay men's shoes, long johns, and a t-shirt. And not far away, a farmer uncovered a knife and a .22 revolver, and officers found a belt stamped with Chuck on the back. It matched the one Chuck had been seen wearing before the murder. Forensics linked it all together. Hairs on the barn clothing matched Kristie's, and hairs found on the discarded clothes matched Chuck's own pubic hair. A mix of blood and semen on the underwear tied them both. And DNA testing made it official. His genetic profile matched the fluids found inside Kristie and on the blood-stained clothing. At trial in late 1994, Chuck's defense tried to rewrite the story. His family testified about his lifelong battles with depression, violent mood swings, and blackouts. His psychiatrist described him as a man with psychogenic amnesia, someone who might act without memory, whose mind could break under pressure. He told the jury that Chuck couldn't tell right from wrong, that years of medication, psychiatric hospitalizations, and a bipolar diagnosis had left him broken. But the evidence told a different story. The blood, the DNA, the carefully hidden body, and every lie Chuck told afterward pointed not to a breakdown, but to a plan. And the state didn't back down. A psychologist from the Mississippi State Hospital took the stand and dismissed the bipolar diagnosis entirely. He said Chuck wasn't psychotic, delusional, or detached from reality. He was faking, malingering. Every action he took after the crime, from stockpiling supplies to misleading the police, suggested clear intent. A forensic psychiatrist agreed. He said Chuck didn't forget what he had done. He understood that what he did was wrong, and he then tried to cover it up. That, he said, was all the jury needed to know. Chuck hadn't lost control. He had made a choice. And it wasn't just that one case hanging over him. At the time of the murder, Chuck had already been out on bond for another violent crime, an earlier case involving rape and aggravated assault from 2 years earlier. In that case, he had also claimed insanity, saying he couldn't remember anything. But the doctors saw through it. They said he was faking, fully aware of his actions, and trying to dodge responsibility. Then, just 4 days before that earlier trial was set to begin, Chuck snapped. In court, jurors listened to hours of testimony about the ransom note, the barn, the weapons, the confession. The story was brutal, and the facts were undeniable. In 1994, they found Chuck guilty of capital murder, committed during the course of a kidnapping, and sentenced him to death. But that wasn't all. Chuck was also convicted of rape, battery, and burglary. For Kristie's rape, he got life. For the burglary and battery, 30 and 15 years. And for the earlier 1993 case, another 46 years were added. Years of appeals followed, but nothing changed the outcome. The courts found no sign of insanity, no legal error, and no reason to spare his life. Then, after spending over 30 years on death row, a date was finally set: October 15, 2025. That morning, officials said Chuck seemed calm. According to a spokesperson for the Mississippi Department of Corrections, he was relaxed and ready to face today. He spent time with his family and met with a preacher he had personally chosen. For his last meal, he asked for a double cheeseburger, French fries, peach cobbler, and chocolate ice cream. When asked if he had any final words, Chuck looked toward his loved ones and said, "To my family, I love you. I'm at peace. I've got God's peace." Then he turned his attention to the victim's relatives and added, "To the victim's family, true closure and true peace. You cannot reach that without God. I'll be in heaven." The process began at 6:01 p.m. Chuck took a few deep breaths, his chest rising and falling. As required under Mississippi's protocol, officials performed a consciousness check after the first drug was administered to confirm he was fully sedated. By 6:06, he was motionless and declared unconscious. And 2 minutes after that, his breathing slowed, becoming shallow and uneven, and his mouth began to quiver. Moments later, he took one final breath before his chest appeared to stop moving entirely. At 6:15 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Charles Ray Crawford was 59 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.